Hey everyone, welcome back again. This is the ET based podcast with myself, Star, and my good friend David Steele. We are back after a short hiatus. I think we all had some things to integrate and just experience life and so on. But we are very excited to finally be back with a brand new episode for you guys. So we hope that you join us. We thought that it might be very good for us to do an episode on CE5 because this is becoming like a hot topic, especially right now. And there's a reason for that, right? So, obviously, for those of you who are familiar, CE5 has been around for quite a while, since the 90s, I believe. So, people have done it before. But especially right now, as things are amping up with open contact and disclosure, and all these things are right around the corner, people are becoming a lot more interested in it. There's a lot more interaction with these concepts. People are forming a lot of groups. Obviously, those of us who come from the metaphysical backgrounds like Bashar, Rohan, and so on, we're being encouraged to form groups to do CE5 collectively and individually as well. We believe that this is a reflection of our own readiness too, because we're making more contact with ourselves. We are now in this place where we can make more or closer contact with the ETs, right? So it's also kind of moving it more into physicality, you could say. So yeah, we feel like everywhere you look, CE5 is just a thing, and people are doing it all over the world, online, like I said, in groups, individually as well. So especially since I'm actually hosting a big CE5 event upcoming Sunday, which is going to be September 29th, we thought that we might as well just tie everything together really nicely and create this episode for you guys where we talk about CE5 more in depth. So that is kind of the idea, what we wish to do in this episode. And yeah, hi, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Star. It's great to be back. It's great to be doing such a exciting subject like CE5. So a lot of us have been very busy and doing our own thing, but at the same time, this is a ideal time to do this. The energy is good. A lot of people, as you mentioned, are interested in CE5 and what's going on, and that a lot of different groups are being urged or encouraged, at least, to do this. And it's an exciting subject because there's a lot going on with it. But I guess you can go ahead and explain basically what CE5 is, and so people have some sort of idea. Not everyone will be familiar with the term.
Sure. So definitely we can do that. That might be a good starting point for us. So yeah, let's talk about CE5 and what it actually is, right? Because it's a term that is kind of floating around, but I noticed a lot of people are not that familiar with it as well. So CE5 essentially stands for Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Now, what is that? That stands for Human Initiated Contact with Communication and Extraterrestrial Life. This is a term that was coined by Stephen Greer, who is the founder of the Center for Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, in the 90s, for those of you who may be familiar with that. So he essentially created this diplomatic and research-based initiative to contact extraterrestrials. As far as the naming itself and why it's called CE5, that's actually based on a concept that comes from J. Allen Hynek's UFO classification system. And so essentially the way he kind of describes these categories is CE1, that's where people see UFOs up close. Then you have CE5, where UFO sightings leave physical evidence, like for instance, landing marks or electromagnetic disturbances, things like that. Then you have CE3, and this is where people see extraterrestrial beings together with UFOs or alongside UFOs. The next point is CE4, and this is where people get taken on board, what some of us term abductions or detainments. So this is obviously something that a lot of people are familiar with as well. And then CE5 is essentially where humans initiate contact, right? So we are the ones who send out the invitation for contact. So the main idea behind his protocols is that human consciousness is connected to the universe, to life, to everything in life. And through that connection, we can create a telepathic link with beings such as extraterrestrials. And we can use different protocols and tools for that, like meditation, sound frequencies, light signals, things like that. And essentially, yeah, form that contact, right, telepathically, and invite them in to show themselves to us, to appear, and to start that communication and that yeah, that interaction and that connection. So if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. It really gives people an overview of that. And J. Allen Hynek did that, I would add, back in those days because he, as a UFO researcher, needed to understand, okay, what kinds of things are we talking about? Because there's a wide range of experiences. And a lot of people will be familiar with the CE1 thing. I think a large number of our audience, even if they haven't had more close encounters, will at least had something they could call a CE1, right? Where they've seen something in the sky, they've seen a ship flying by that wasn't a satellite or something else and did strange maneuvers. A lot of people have those experiences at least once, if not many times in their lives. Some people may not have. But the idea is that people will be familiar with the ideas. And of course, some of these things have been made into movies like Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is about CE3, right? But one of the points I want to make about this is that in a lot of this idea of meeting extraterrestrials, meeting interdimensionals, or just anything from not from Earth, the way it's depicted and described a lot of the time is that the other beings, the aliens, or whatever you want to call them, the extraterrestrials, are the ones who are running the show, who are doing everything. And in a lot of the literature, this gives the impression that the humans are less important somehow. And that's not really the case. The idea with this is that the humans are just as important as the extraterrestrials in the contact. And the nice thing about CE5 compared to the others is that it's something where humans are actually taking action themselves and they're sort of saying, okay, I take my own agency. I am part of this. I am requesting this. The implicit idea there is that I see you more as an equal. I am empowered. I'm doing something myself in a positive way to create this experience. So it turns something which for a lot of people can be a passive thing where they're just receiving this or seeing a UFO or they observe the evidence or they maybe meet a being, but the being is the one deciding sort of how this interaction takes place. And this is being flipped around where the humans are the ones requesting and asking for the interaction. And we'll get into later about how that actually works in practice. And what a lot of channelers, psychics, and others say, and also people who are experiencers when they meet them, is that they prefer when humans see themselves as equals to the extraterrestrials and not as some sort of subservient people where the ETs are treated as sort of gods or whatever. So CE5 is a way of enabling that and being self-empowered in the whole connection so that you feel like you're on the same playing field. And that's actually what they really want to do. So it's a very good thing in many ways, both in terms of contacting the ETs, but also in terms of changing your own internal psychology about how you think of yourself with regard to the ETs. So let's go into the deeper concepts of CE5, how it works, and why it works. So, extraterrestrial beings are always around us, and we are always in contact, basically. For them, it's just a question of being, for the most part, in a different sort of reality or out of our perception. It's more about bringing them into the physical reality we are and making them visible or perceivable by us. They might be in the sky, they might even be next to you, they might be anywhere, they might be in any time or any reality. The idea is that by contacting them consciously, then we're able to ask them to materialize in a way where we can perceive them. It could be physically, it could be in a ship, it could be through some other kind of gesture or some weather or whatever, and we'll get into that later. But the idea here is that it's distance isn't a factor. You don't have to think about whether they're on the other side of the universe or next to you. That's all kind of irrelevant. It's a question of making that conscious connection. And once you've made that conscious connection by virtue of the fact that you're basically sharing that version of you with them through consciousness, then they know who you are, they know your intention, they know what you're about, and we'll get into why intention is important later. But that also means they know where you are, when you are, what reality they're in, and if they want to tune into you and they're into that, then they can do that, right? So that's all you need to do. There's nothing else really necessary for you to do once you make that connection in terms of opening up to them, because they will understand who you are because they can tap into the consciousness of who you are when you open up yourself and your heart and mind. Star, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I think that's very well said. I think it's important for people to understand sort of the core concept of CE5 and how it really works. And that is this idea of, you know, we're not necessarily contacting beings that are millions of light years away, right? Even though, like you said, time and space is an illusion, and technically they could be here at any moment in time, so to speak. But really, what we're doing, and the core of CE5 is basically to make the invisible visible, right? By tuning our consciousness, our vibration, our frequency to be able to perceive them. That is really also, if you think about it, another way of making contact, because then we're expanding our awareness of what's already around us at all times, be it even other beings, such as elementals, such as nature spirits, such as extraterrestrials, crafts, and so on. So the idea is really that they're always around us anyway. And we are just sort of like elevating our frequency and our vibration and shifting our consciousness to be able to perceive what's already around us. So that is a big sort of shift from how some people may typically look at it, whereas it's about sort of signaling to them that you're here, because that's not what it's about, right? It's about you shifting your consciousness to perceive what already is around you. And the more you do that, and the more you're able to do that, that also tells you, almost like as a feedback mechanism, that you're more ready for more contact because you're able to tune into these realities that are around you anyway. But perhaps it is a good idea to discuss the different modalities of CE5 and how people can do them, because I believe you had some good ideas for that and understandings of these concepts. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about what are the basics of the approaches and what kind of things can we use to do CE5.
Sure, that's a very interesting subject. And of course, there's as many ways to do that as there are people, right? Because everyone has their own ideas. But if we just start off with the basic Stephen Greer approach, the basic Stephen Greer approach, and there are different versions of this also, but I'll just sort of name one of them, is to gather a group of people around, normally in a quiet place, get into a meditative state with those people, and then perform guided meditation in which you visualize yourself sort of becoming an energy body and with energetics coming out with bubbles, etc., being formed. I'm shortening all this for the sake of brevity, but where you extend that out and you use the energy to reach out into the universe symbolically, of course, as we just described, to connect to these beings and then to open your mind to whatever you receive afterwards. And sometimes he supplements these things with different kinds of mantras or things of that kind, some sounds sometimes as well. But he keeps it pretty basic. It's mostly about the guided meditation. And then afterwards, the idea of waiting for any kind of contact after that and maintaining the state of the group and the high frequency so that you take the time necessary for whatever that needs to happen. And that, of course, can be anything from just a conscious connection to something small physical, where you feel something next to you, or you feel a being around you, or you see something in the sky. So that's the basic Stephen Greer approach. There are a lot of variations of this, though. One of them, for example, there's an app you can get, and there's many apps that do this, but there's at least one called the CE5 app, which is actually based on this and has some special sounds and things like that. So you can use that as a additional tool if you want to do that. Some people like using particular kinds of nature sounds that they believe have something to do with UFOs and mean something to them. Remember, this is about consciousness, so it has to do with things that what makes sense to you and what makes sense to the group. There are also people who use extended repeated mantras to get into a sort of altered state. So they'd simply repeat the mantras, whether it be or something more complicated, to achieve a state where they sort of get their left brain, their logical brain out of the way. And so they're really connecting on a more right brain emotional side, which a lot of people say is a good modality to use. So there's a lot of forms of contact and variations of CE5 that use this. There's also things like including crystals, things like bonfires. Sometimes people like to put bonfires around for a variety of reasons. And we know that bonfires have a symbolic effect on the human mind psychologically and sociologically. They put us in a certain state. Crystals can do that too. That means a lot to a lot of people. And in general, the setting, we'll get into that later. We have a whole thing we want to talk about different kinds of settings you can be in, but the choice of the setting can also affect the kind of experience you have. One other thing is to make it more interactive. So some people like to take, for example, small flashlights, and the extraterrestrials don't need this. It's mostly for our own sake, but just point flashlights, and please don't use lasers for many reasons, but pointing simple flashlights at the sky where they think something's happening, and in their mind asking for some sort of response, maybe to have the ship flash or something else happened. And of course, this always has to come from a point of sort of humility and a genuine desire for contact, and not from a desire just to have some fun, right? This is an honest form of connection, a deep form of connection. A lot of people like to focus on the idea of being somewhere isolated. So this goes into the setting idea again. So it may be tempting, of course, to do this near a city, and you can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times, because there's so many other energies, this may change the results you get. A lot of people report having better results when they go to more isolated locations away from people and basically only in nature. A lot of people also like bringing various sort of gadgets with them because, of course, we are, in our development, a technological society. So people like to bring things like magnetometers and things that measure electric fields and things like that. You don't have to do this, but if it excites you, if it's really interesting for you, then by all means do that. And then, after you've done the meditation part, you may actually see that the magnetometers do strange things, right? They should normally not to do anything strange, but they have been known to do that. And continuing on the technological idea, some people like to bring recording devices because they report hearing sounds, or sometimes afterwards they will play things back and hear sounds then that they didn't hear during the experience. And this can also include things like cameras, binoculars, telescopes, whatever. But just two things, right? Remember that if you bring all these gadgets, that they may not work. Because one of the things that happens is that ET technology a lot of times interferes with this for a variety of reasons. So don't be upset if they don't, because that would be normal. And that would actually be something to be glad happened. And also, the point is to have the consciousness experience in the first place, to actually connect with the ETs and understand what they're about, receive any messages from them, have it be from the heart. You don't want to miss the experience because you're just fumbling with your camera the whole time. So don't miss out on the experience just because you want to record it. It's just as important, and actually more important, for you to actually perceive it yourselves. Because this is a consciousness connection, also like telepathy, or telepathy, as some people would call it, this communication between minds and hearts is something that's really a central part of this. And so you can send them thoughts, you can send them emotions, you could send them love, for example. You could send them a genuine desire to meet, anything you like of this kind. And then if you clear out your mind and just keep it open, you oftentimes can receive an emotion or a thought or something like that, which you can feel or sense is not your own, right? So that's something that a lot of people use, and I would encourage that myself. I've had success with that myself. Some people like to do energy clearing work so that they feel like the area around the CE5 site is clear, and with white sage burning, this kind of thing. If that works for you and your group likes it, then by all means do that. Another thing which can be quite fun is that some people like to do role playing. So this is really getting into your CE5, where you play like you're the ETs. And this has two advantages. One, you're bringing them closer to you. You're making it less foreign by pretending to be the ETs or role playing it as part of the CE5. But you're also making it playful. And one of the energies which the ETs very much is playful energy, where the energy is less serious. That tends to lead to higher vibrations. That tends to lead to situations where contact is easier because that's more close to the vibration they're normally at. They're normally at play in terms of how they see themselves. Let's go on to some other aspects of it. We talked about intention and that kind of thing, and transmitting an intention to them, understanding what they're about. Star, could you go into these kinds of details about that and how consciousness and our intent relates to all that?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that the most important thing about CE5, again, like we talked about before, is the heart to heart connection, right? That we establish with them, because that's essentially what the connection is, right? Even if it's telepathic or making contact in other ways, it's important to bridge that link of consciousness between us, right? So I would say one of the key points that's important for people to understand is that you have this idea, right, that there's one consciousness really in the universe, in life, whatever you want to call that. And we are just connecting to that. And we are part of that, they are part of it. And so that should make that link very effortless, and understanding that that's how we connect with them, first and foremost. The second thing I would say is that it's important to come with clear intentions and sincerity, and be of a sincere heart, you could say, because like you said, this isn't about, you know, the thrill of seeing UFOs, right? This is about establishing a genuine connection with them. So I think the more that you come from that place in yourself, the more you can genuinely connect to ETs, just as it's the same with other people, right? Or your friends and family. So this isn't really any different in that aspect of that. So yeah, and then the one thing that a lot of channelers have shared with us is that intention is really what's important here. And this kind of goes back to this point you made earlier about how we as humans have agency in this, right? And we are not just the receivers of this thing, but we are the co-creators of it. And so when they see that we invite them in, that also gives them permission from their side to respond to us. So it has been shared with us before that CE5 is all about having a consciousness of invitation. And so I think if we approach it like that and then just be open to it without expectation or insistence, that's kind of when you see the most in terms of the effect that it can have. And then, of course, there's different ways of doing CE5 as well. You can do it in a group setting, or you could do it individually, right? Now, both of these forms have their own advantages, you could say. Of course, if you are just alone and you don't have many people around you in your area, like let's say you live in like a super isolated area, right? And it's just more convenient for you to do it on your own, you can definitely do that on your own. And then also another added benefit of doing it alone is that it's going to be much more, let's say, designed around you and your own soul path. So you can make very sort of personal and intimate connections with certain ETs that you have soul connections with. But of course, you can also do it in a group, right? And one of the main advantages of doing it with groups, and really what groups are good for, is this idea of you're bringing a lot of people together that have the same intention and the same goal and the same alignment. And when that group consciousness puts out that energy, right, it just builds the momentum very fast. So it's a great way to build energies and momentum very rapidly. And this is why groups often have these experiences of being able to make contact very easily. So it all depends kind of on your own situation, of course. And there's no right or wrong. You can do it, you can do it on your own. You could do it with other people as well. It really doesn't matter. If you do it with other people, it's also important to understand that even though you are a group and you give out like a group vibration, let's say, right? But you still are there with individual people. And so each person still has their own reality. And so they may have their own, or they will actually have their own sort of individual experiences. And it has happened before that, let's say, some people see something, but others don't, right? Because we all are different people, we have different paths, and some things may not be relevant for us to see where it is for others. And of course, we may have a different vibration and a different level of consciousness and evolution and so on. And so If you do it in a group, it is also very likely that each person will have their own reality of that experience. People have said, like, well, how do I do this when, let's say, I feel I am much more ready for contact than the other person, right? So it has been suggested that those people who do have these experiences, that do see things, they can act as vibrational examples for those people who may not yet see things, right? And of course, synchronicity arranges these meetings as it arranges everything, right? So I would say whoever is relevant to be at these meetings with you will be there, and whoever is not, and whoever it's not relevant for or compatible, then eventually they'll just fall away. So I think the whole thing kind of organizes itself. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, because I know Bashar has talked about this as well in the Interstellar Alliance social experiment. I believe it's step 6, right? Where he talks about doing gatherings and forming groups and then doing CE5. So you are very familiar with his material. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and see how that links into what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And an excellent point you made with regard to the different vibrational examples and how that works in a group setting. I think that's a very important thing for people to know. Yeah, so Bashar talks about these kinds of gatherings in step 6 of the Interstellar Alliance social experiment. And for those of you who don't know Bashar, a lot of you probably do, but Bashar is a being, an extraterrestrial being channeled by Daryl Anka, who's been doing so for over 40 years now. And very recently, a lot of this material has been focused on open contact, which Bashar describes as being very upcoming. And the point of these steps in general is just to prepare us more for the idea of open contact. So with this one, he focused on the idea of doing CE5s. And while explaining these CE5s, one of the things that he stressed, not only was it to open us up to the idea of extraterrestrials and getting the idea of meeting them as being something normal, normalizing it in our hearts and in our minds. But it's also a great opportunity for humans to bond with each other. Because if we're going to be able to open our hearts to extraterrestrials, we need to, of course, open our hearts and minds to those around us who are even closer, our neighbors, strangers, and people like that. So the idea of CE5 is that this allows us to bond to each other as humans as well. So when people bond to each other this way and share the same goals as energies, it creates this kind of connection that, as you were describing earlier, Star Alliance frequencies that are needed for open contact so that we become more compatible with each other. So we become more compatible with each other, with each other's differences. We see the advantages of the diversity between us, and we appreciate that. And that is a stepping stone, which is very important to actually appreciating the diversities between us and extraterrestrials, which will, of course, be far bigger. So you can use that also as a way of smoothing out that connection you have with your fellow humans as well. So the more people gather in like peaceful remote locations, the more they're preparing for open contact events. In a few years, the more we'll be aligning those frequencies and the more smooth and quick open contact can be. So this creates kind of a collective energy, right? Which helps shift us into those realities where open contact takes place, or where, we're a part of that. And also, sometimes it's interesting to do these things. I was just going to say in like very small groups of 2 or 3, because, it will be more dependent on your soul life path as to how that contact may happen and when. So one individual may find that contact takes its cue from their life path, and it may be somewhat different from that of a collective group. So sometimes a smaller group can work better than a bigger group. So you may be tempted in some cases to have a huge group, and that'll work great, of course, if people are aligned. But a smaller group can also be just as effective. So don't be afraid to have smaller groups, which are 2 or 3, with people who have a very similar vibration and that kind of thing. But we were talking earlier, Star, about this idea of how the setting, the sort of the location and the details of that are more important. Maybe you could talk a little bit about good ideas for locations and what people need to think about.
Definitely. So locations and settings are kind of paramount in this whole thing. Obviously, for kind of obvious reasons, you want to do this sort of more outside cities and away from civilization, city lights and noise, things like that. Basically, a place where you can be undisturbed, right? Where you can really focus, a place where you're comfortable, where you feel at home, where you can just relax and really tune into this idea. So, usually, places like nature are very good, like things like countrysides or deserts, beaches as well, forests, basically anywhere that you can sort of go outside your own society and civilization. Because also nature, helps you to connect with yourself too, right? Because we are nature and an extension of nature. So doing it that way makes it also easier on that level to sort of connect with yourself first and then connect to them, if that makes sense. Another tip I can give is, because ETs are of a much higher vibration than most humans, it is actually not that easy for them to enter our dimension. And so it was explained to us many times that that's why these settings, such as high vibrational locations on Earth, vortices, and so on, and places where you have a lot of portals, such as Sedona or Skinwalker Ranch or Mount Shasta, and so on and so forth, because they're much higher in vibration, naturally, it is actually a lot easier for these ETs to kind of use that as a doorway to enter into our dimension. And so that's why, that's another reason why these places have so much traffic, right? From interdimensional beings and extraterrestrial beings and so on and so forth. So, this isn't by any means like a requirement that you have to be in these places, but if you are or can get to these places, then I really suggest taking advantage of that energy that's already there. And then another tip I can give is, like, let's say you are in a setting around water, such as a lake or an ocean. They've also said that doing it that way can really amplify the energies even more, as water is kind of helps to conduce energy and sort of elevate your own vibration as well. It's its own sort of energy source for the idea of emotional waves. And also, it connects to the series vibration, right? So, connecting to the series vibration through water also increases that frequency much faster. So, if you can do it in water, of course, not everybody can, it's not a requirement, but that is another option for sure. And then one thing I would not do is go to, let's say, haunted places because of their, usually these places have or can carry residual energy, which would not probably make good choices for things like CE5 activities, right? So in a nutshell, I would say, yeah, just try to keep it away from civilization, be in like a nature setting where you won't be disturbed, where you can really focus and tune into yourself and then tune into them. And then perhaps we can talk about some of the beings that are involved in CE5. So the idea is that those are usually the beings that are close to us and the closest to us, and the types of beings that will make first contact with us. So that, of course, includes civilizations like the Aiel, the Nordics, the Pleiadians, the Tall Whites. I believe there are also other species in there as well that we're not familiar with yet. But the idea is really, from what I've heard anyway, is that the Aiel are sort of like the most involved with that, as are the Pleiadians. And they also use that, right, to kind of measure our energy and our responses to their presence and to their signals. So, which of course makes sense that they would be doing these kinds of things, right? And that's why it was also actually suggested that people like the Sasani, for instance, they have a different role in contact, right? So they are much more focused on delivering us information and sort of getting us vibrationally ready for contact, if that makes sense. But perhaps we can now talk about what kind of things can you actually, quote unquote, expect to see and experience, right? Of course, without expectation or insistence. But it might be interesting to talk about what kind of things do people actually experience with CE5 and what kind of contacts can be made. So I was curious, David, what is your take on that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing because, of course, people, especially new people to CE5, are going to be understandably curious, right? About, well, what can I expect? What range of stuff happens a lot of times in these things? And of course, you can go there and depending on the person, it can be nothing or everything, right? So the idea is to go in there with no expectation, just a clear mind and a clear heart, and the intention which you were describing earlier. And of course, you can observe UFOs and things like that in the distance. They will usually not come too close unless they feel they can. So it will really depend on the group, or if you're alone, depending on you. And they won't try to push your boundaries too much. They know what would be too much for you. So they will go in and limit themselves in that way. So you might see UFOs in the sky. There might be off at a distance where they're nice and neutral, within visible view of you, or maybe with flashing lights if it's when it's nighttime. It might be something where they are visible to you on your night vision goggles or your binoculars if they know you have those. But UFOs are not the only thing. It's not always a physical ship. Orbs of light. Remember, orbs are also forms of consciousness too. They're not just balls, they're also consciousness themselves. Those are very common in CE5 events, and you might just see one whiz by in the distance in the forest, for example, if that's where you're setting. Or you might see little wisps of beings going through. Many people report feeling like beings are going past them, kind of like wisps of wind, but with sort of a conscious element to them, which kind of sweep behind them or around groups of them. And they might feel a touch on their shoulder. So don't be surprised if you feel like something touches your shoulder or touches some part of your body or your foot or something briefly, but where you actually don't see anything. This can actually be something, and some people have reported even catching some of these things briefly on camera as well. The other thing I would say is that be open to all the different kinds of things that can happen to you. Don't judge anything as being irrelevant. Everything is symbolic, everything is important. And remember that the CE5 experience doesn't end when everybody packs up their things and goes home. The CE5 experience opens you up vibrationally to a very, very broad spectrum of phenomena, including continued contact afterwards. So you may have telepathic communication on your way home or at home or even several days afterward. You may have dream encounters with them because sometimes it's easier for them to meet you in the dreams because you may or may not completely be ready for the idea of them being close to you, but they would like to contact you because they like the idea of talking to you or interacting with you emotionally as well. So the idea would be that that's more easy to do in a dream because you're in a more neutral state and more interactions are possible there. And those interactions are real, just like the ones in physical reality. So those are very important things to consider as well. And so the sky is basically the limit in terms of the things you can experience. It can be anything, also things I'm not mentioning here, lights flashing in the distance, for example, where there shouldn't be any lights, this kind of thing as well. So just be open to the idea that whatever you're getting is probably a sign of some kind, and I think you'll be good. But maybe this is a good point now. We're getting a good ways into this. Let's talk about some tips about things you can do and things like that, because people are probably thinking, okay, I know how to do this, the basics, I get these general ideas, but there's little things you want to do here and there probably to make the whole experience better. So maybe you could talk a bit about that for a while, Star.
Sure. So, one thing I would suggest strongly is to bring certain objects with you, such as, for instance, crystals, gems. You can also use rocks from these high vibrational places, like let's say Sedona or Skinwalker Ranch or Upheaval Dome in Utah. All these kinds of places, as they carry that energy with them, and so again, that helps you kind of amplify your own energy. So you can definitely, bring things with you that you would normally also use in your own meditation, right? Another tip I can give is, so one thing we were taught in our own contact journeys was to sort of create this idea of your own contact spot in nature, which is this idea that you go to this place often, right? And the more you go there and you just sit there and you meditate and you send out an invitation to these beings, the more you kind of imprint your own energy in that spot. And so it's easier for beings to find you as you kind of create like your own little grid work or portal around you. And also, one thing you can do is, let's say you do have one of these places, you can actually take some, whatever that place has, whether it's some rocks or twigs or whatever, And you can bring that with you to your next CE5 because, again, everything is energy and vibration, right? So the more you kind of create your own fingerprints with this and take that with you, the more that also helps with contacts. And then another thing, and I think this is, especially if you're a follower of like different Sasani channelers, right? Like Rohan, Bashar, and so on. We have sort of been given this permission slip of the Interstellar Alliance ID card, right? So it was mentioned that we can take those with us when we do CE5. And this is important for a variety of reasons, because obviously, when you take that card with you, that card sort of is your galactic identity, you could say, right? Like your true self. And so you're taking that with you as a representation, as a symbol of, I am this person, right? Not just, of course, with the card, but energetically and vibrationally. And this is actually a short side tip I can give to people aside from CE5 is the more you carry this card with you and use it, the more you kind of blend with that idea and you become your galactic self, let's say, or like the contact self, at least the person that makes the contact and has contact already. So the more you can sort of make that natural, the more you start emitting that frequency and that vibration, and they respond to that, right? So it's a good idea to bring your ID cards with you. And then the next thing I can say is it also might be a good idea to document your CE5s. And I think it is very likely that you will have experiences after doing CE5, right? And of course, they can come in many different forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sighting of a big ship. You could also be contacted in dream state or telepathically, so on and so forth. And so the more you kind of document that, the more, you're conscious of these experiences, right? And that helps you retain also the energy and the frequency of that. And then you tune to that reality more and more, right? So it's kind of like what Bashar said, the more you remember, the more they can give you. So I would also highly suggest sort of keeping a list, if you can, of everything that you experience on this journey with CE5. And yeah, those are kind of my tips. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but if not, then perhaps, one other thing that's I think important for people to understand is how CE5 can also act as a mirror and a reflection to us to learn certain things about ourselves. So maybe this is a good time to talk about that. David, what do you say?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I really like the idea of bringing things that you associate with yourself to sort of boost your own presence there, like these, for example, stones or crystals that you consider a part of yourself. I think that's a really great idea. And
Hmm.
one of the things to remember about these kind of contact, and you talked about it earlier, is that people perceive different things. There's no right or wrong here. So it's really important, I would say, to discuss and agree internally in the group, assuming you're doing a group CE5, that the idea is to be positive and don't discount or dismiss any of the things that others observe or experience. Don't say this was this, no, that was that, and argue about that. Accept what other people see and experience, even if you disagree personally, and let everybody's perceptions be valid because the way these things work, perception and reality are basically subjective anyway. And that's how the ETs perceive things. It all has to do with their state of being. So I think it's really important for people to realize that internally they all have to agree before you even start this that we're all going to be positive about everybody else's experiences so that everybody feels seen and feels validated. But yeah, let's talk about using CE5 as a learning tool, right? Because it's not just a question of okay, we're going to go out and we're going to meet the ETs and we're going to see UFOs. It's a good way of learning about your other humans and it's a good way of learning about yourself. So the more you open yourself up to this kind of contact, you open your heart, you open your mind, you open up to a better understanding of yourself. So by doing CE5, this also leads to sort of free self-development work. When you meditate, which is part of these experiences normally, when you engage in telepathic contact, all these things may, especially in these quiet areas where there's not a lot of disturbances, where there's not a lot of distractions, you may find that you confront parts of yourselves that you normally just don't go and interact with. This could be like, for example, negative beliefs. It could be some idea about yourself that suddenly in the middle of CE5 pops up, and that's okay, right? It's okay if these things happen, and it's actually a good thing because the more you do this, the more you'll be able to discover more of yourself. And the extraterrestrials themselves, a lot of people report how strongly they are integrated as individuals. They don't have a lot of doubts, for example, about themselves. Typically, they don't have a lot of negative thoughts and this kind of thing. So if you want to be on their vibration, it's also important for you to clean up the negative beliefs and fears that you have yourself. So by actually using CE5 like this, you give yourself another tool to be able to open up who you are, open up to your belief systems, open up to your understandings and fears, and working through them to align your energy more with the energy which is needed for open contact. So it's a total win-win in that sense. By doing this, you improve who you are, you get to know yourself even better, and you let go of things you don't need. And at the same time, you also open up to the extraterrestrials who also work on that basis in terms of their beliefs. So, when you meet these beings, just as when you meet other people, they're going to act as mirrors for you and they're going to reflect the current state of your spiritual development. So if you go in with a lot of fears and beliefs, you may get those fears and negative beliefs back from them in your interactions. And of course, everybody going in, I assume, is going to want to have a very positive interaction with these extraterrestrials in CE5 contact. So the idea here is the more you prepare yourself and work on your own internal development and use CE5 as a tool for that, then you will meet them in a way where the reflection you get back is a very positive and a very loving one, and one which you just want to keep going and going and going. You can also ask, for those of you who are into this kind of thing, your spirit guides or your higher mind or others for a role in helping you through this process, saying, look, if there's something I need to look at here for my CE5, please show it to me. Ask them to do that, and then just mark that intention and see what happens. You may find out that you discover something about yourself you didn't know, and you can then say, okay, is this really true about myself? Do I need this belief anymore? And then let it go. If you're used to any sort of tradition, let's say like Bashar or some of the others where they talk about letting go of negative beliefs, this will seem very familiar to you. But you don't need to know that necessarily to do it. You just need to understand that you choose which beliefs are true for you or not. So this is a great tool for self-development. So you can use it in that way. So see it as something that is something you can integrate into your daily life. You can do CE5 in your home when you are having a quiet moment. It doesn't have to be at night necessarily, but you can also do it in these group settings, and you combine all these together into a complete self-development and internal development practice to improve yourself from a spiritual level as well. And Star, I think we're getting toward the end of this thing. I think you had some things you wanted to mention as well.
Yes, definitely. So, in closing, I would just like to say and kind of explain why it's important to do these CE5s, especially right now as we are getting closer to disclosure and open contact and really becoming like a galactic species, right? So, the idea is that the more we take action, physical action on these things, the more we shift to these realities where contact is already happening. So I would highly, highly suggest that people do this as often as they feel, excited to do, of course. Always let excitement and synchronicity guide you. But the more we take action on our preferred realities, especially right now, the more we can really amplify that energy and that momentum and shift to these realities much faster. So, on that note, I have also actually created sort of like a global CE5 meditation. That is to say that it is open to anybody really and everybody from, any group at all, right? Whether you come from the more metaphysical groups, like obviously we're very familiar with Bashar, Ryoka, Rohan, so on and so forth, but also other spiritual groups, right? And disclosure groups, and really just anybody, invites anybody and everybody that you can think of. Even your own C5 groups can join us for this event as well. This is going to be a virtual online event that we're going to hold on September the 29th, which is this upcoming Sunday,
2024,
and
right? For those listening later.
2024, indeed. And yeah, it should be very exciting. One of my very good friends, Yvonne, who is a very good hypnotherapist, is going to be doing the guided meditation part. So we actually did an event like this. Well, not exactly like this. We did like a group regression session last year, which ended up being very interesting. And people have gotten quite a lot from that. So, yeah, I strongly believe he is the man for the job. And I also believe if we do this on such a large collective scale, again, we will really be able to amplify these energies, these vibrations, and shift to these realities more and more. And I also strongly believe that this will unlock a lot more contact for people. Again, be it in dream state or even physical contact in various ways, right? Sightings and so on. So I would invite you all to join us again this Sunday, September 29th, 2024. It's going to be held at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So that is 2 p.m. for those on the East Coast. And that's going to be 8 p.m. Central European time, just to give you kind of an idea. And yeah, I would say, again, you're all invited. So we definitely hope to see you, as many of you as possible there. And we're very excited about this event. So if you have anything else to add to that, David?
Yeah, I would just say thank you, Star, for an excellent episode. I think we've really covered the entire spectrum of CE5 and what it is, especially for those who are not familiar with it. And hopefully they gained some sort of understanding enough that it might have piqued their interest. And it's going to be really exciting. We live in super exciting times, and it's been really, really fun doing this. So thank you everyone for listening to our podcast today. We will be talking to you again soon, and perhaps also at Star's CE5 event together with Yvonne. I think it's going to be really, really amazing. So don't be afraid to attend that. I think it could be an amazing experience for you, and maybe it could be your first experience if you never had one. So maybe that could be your introduction. You never know. So anyway, from my side, thank you very much.
See
See
you
you all.
later. Bye.